We are on. Hello. There we go. Hi, everybody. So apologies for any of the technical delays. We are all moving forward with what we can do right now. So we'd like to welcome you today, and thanks for joining us. My name is Megan Haw, and I'm the marketing coordinator at the University of Windsor's Continuing Education. In advance of our launch of the Applied Leadership Program, we're really pleased to present this opportunity and to welcome you to today's panel discussion on this extremely timely topic of leading through change. We are witnessing an unprecedented challenges in the face of change in all aspects of our lives right now. However, as leaders, or aspiring leaders in particular, I mean, be it in your workplace or within the community or other facets of our lives, it's vital to be adequately equipped to be able to guide others and navigate teams smoothly and with confidence. So our expert panel here today will delve into these challenges by addressing the important components of successful leadership, and especially on the topic of leadership through change. So let me take a moment to introduce our panel, who's joining us today to explore these important topics. Sindhya Junjo, is the Corporate HR Solutions Leader, Talent Acquisition and Development at Highline. So thanks for being here today, Sindhya. Would you like to tell us a little bit about your role at Highline and the company's involvement as the corporate project sponsor for the Applied Leadership Program? You might be on mute, Sindhya, sorry. Are you there, Sindhya? Okay. Well, perhaps we'll move on then. We'll start with Diana. If you'd like to take the lead and introduce yourself, please.
Absolutely. I'm going to try to turn on my camera and apologize if that doesn't work out. But my name is Diana Sarkis. As a little background in my professional experience, I've worked in the field of human resources for about 13 years in a variety of interesting industries. So I've worked in manufacturing, professional services, and then most predominantly the greater public sector. So through this experience, I've had the wonderful opportunity to work with many leaders and additionally help them enhance their effectiveness as leaders and work through them for some very difficult challenges. So related to the Applied Leadership Program, I'll be delivering 2 modules. The leadership session, where I'll have the opportunity for participants to not only look at how you lead, but why you lead. So we'll explore personal and leadership motivations to work on your own professional development. We'll look at leadership theories and best practices to make you more effective. At the end of this first session that I'll be leading, you'll be developing a leadership development program that will allow you to take those tools and continue to develop your leadership effectiveness. So the second session that I'll be delivering will be supervising and coaching. So this will definitely be a very practical session. We'll be looking at the daily activities of a functional supervisor. And this will take a practical approach so to ensure that our participants are more confident with sometimes these very difficult, uncomfortable, not so pleasant situations. So we'll be talking about giving constructive feedback, coaching, handling complaints, and we'll also discuss this coaching function and look at the leader as a coach. So at the end of this session, you'll have a sample plan
is now exiting.
That will allow you to practice the coaching theory that we're going to be discussing. So both of these sessions will integrate theory and practice to ensure that you have the tools to be more confident in your role. And as well, we'll be providing a number of different resources for your continued development.
That's great. Thank you. Let's take a moment now to meet with Dr. Kyle Breichman. He's an assistant professor of management at Odette School of Business at the University of Windsor. Dr. Breichman, could you fill us in a bit on your role in the Applied Leadership Program and what you will bring to the virtual classroom?
Yes, happy to, and happy to be here. So I'll be teaching the course on the science of effective teamwork. And so the focus on that course is going to be on kind of the 6 pillars of team resilience is how we've crafted it. And so it's really trying to understand what it is that makes a team, as opposed to us individuals, very resilient. Obviously, very timely with what we're experiencing today, and something I'm sure we're going to continue discussing during the call. And also going to be focusing on people's personal conflict management strategies, and then actually applying them within the course, understanding how you approach conflict, how others do, and then what are the best situations, how to modulate yourself. So we'll also have some exercises to bring home the idea of this idea of team resilience, how you actually build a resilient team, what a resilient team looks like. And both of these really fit with my research on interpersonal team dynamics. So I study team resilience, I study team conflict. So really excited to teach this module.
That's great, thanks. And finally, for now, we'll move to Dr. Catherine Qantas, who's a professor of industrial organizational psychology at the University of Windsor. Over to you, Catherine.
Hello, everyone, and I apologize for video not working. It's the times. I'm really excited to be a part of this, and I'll be leading 2 different modules. The first module will be on communication. As you've heard from Dr. Breichman and from Diana, the communication thread is so important in so many different aspects of leading and leadership, especially during challenging times. The communication module will be looking at different modalities of communication and developing strategies for effective communication, looking at the modality, matching the message to the modality, making sure the message is clear, and also we'll be spending some time working with the ethics of communication. What is ethically responsible communication in the workplace? The second module that I'll be leading will be managing change. Sometimes change is planned, sometimes change is not planned, as we have found out with all the changes due to the pandemic situation. But this module will look at first how to plan for change if you have the opportunity. If it's a strategic change, what can you put into place to help make sure the change goes more smoothly? How do you develop readiness for change? But whether it's planned for or not, we'll also be looking at and have a lot of exercises related to how do you shepherd the change? How do you help people that you're leading deal with the changes, be receptive to the changes, and to have it go as smoothly as possible? And we'll end up in that module looking at how do you maintain the changes in the workplace. When you have people who are used to doing things one way and suddenly we have to do things a different way, how do you maintain the changes that are desired in a way that becomes the new norm? So those are the 2 modules I'll be leading, and I'm looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great introduction and a bit of a high-level overview of what the Applied Leadership Program will be about. I guess taking that in the broader context and really honing in on the topic of today's discussion, which is how to lead through change. And again, the timeliness of this topic. If Sandhya is here, she is, as I mentioned, the corporate HR from Highline Mushrooms. So we're very grateful to have Highline Mushrooms participating with us today for the talk as our industry representative, and also in the program as our corporate project sponsor. So what is happening there is that through Highline Mushrooms' involvement in the program, they'll be presenting case studies and real-life practical leadership issues and challenges that they're facing in their organization, which will be thread through each of the topics and modules in the program. So as for today's presentation, Sandhya, I see a name. Are you able to maybe log in a bit and do a test?
Hey, Megan, I am on. Not sure if everyone can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. So
Okay.
I guess as an industry representative, and in terms of today's discussion topic of leading through change, could you discuss some leadership trends or issues in the current environment at Highline, or some things that are occurring as a repetitive level for you?
Sure. Just a bit of background. So in agriculture industry, change has been a constant from some time. Which is where leadership is needed a lot. And it has been a challenge to find the right leaders experienced in agriculture industry. So the most common form or source where we try to establish leadership is from our internal resources. It has been challenging to find the right kind of skill set because most are associates or employees who have been working with the company and are experienced enough don't have the right skill set. So with changes and leadership and automation where agriculture industry is proceeding to, we are facing common issues in terms of skill development. Most common leadership issues that we face are in terms of training new associates. So we have some experienced associates who are further promoted and made junior supervisors, not necessarily managers, but just training aspect of how will they deliver new trainings or communication skills to newer hires and train them for the job. That's one source where we have seen it a bit difficult. And then lack of problem solving skills or investigating different issues that happen every day at workplace. So just from attendance issues to any harassment complaint, all of that. So terms of tracking the complaint or working on the facts and just asking all the people involved in this investigation, asking them right questions, recording those investigations or proofs towards it, and then just presenting a case to HR because they should technically be the first source of resolving a complaint. We have seen issues there where most are supervisors who are currently in the role lack these skills. Another issue that we see is, which is very common, is the computer skills. Like I said, our source to bring on supervisors or leaders are through our internal people. And because they're not trained enough, they may not have educational backgrounds that can help them in catching up with just new technology. So even with just basic computer skills of like Microsoft Office or even emails or basic etiquettes of email, so like not responding to everyone, who to include on an email, all of that training is very, very important. Also with just technology, we have new HR systems that we use, and we do find it a bit difficult for newer supervisors to use those systems. So that's challenging as well. Another issue that I can closely relate to is employee relations. So or employee reviews, performance reviews, and just conducting those reviews and keeping aside any sort of biases towards any employees. That's a challenge currently. And
could I assume then that in many of these cases, it's could be tied into leadership, communication in certain ways, aside from the technology, which is linked. I guess I would ask Catherine if you could maybe discuss the importance of communication strategies, especially in these uncertain times, and how to plan appropriately, and the role of communication plays in change management.
Absolutely. Communication is just so fundamental, as has already been pointed out. We use communication for formal purposes, but there's always an informal element and the human element that's a part of it that can be aligned with the message or not aligned with the message. So how ideas are communicated is really important. Communication from top down kind of sets the culture of an organization. It indicates what may be talked about. In uncertain times, people have questions. How things are communicated to people is important in terms of the extent to which people feel they can ask questions and gain more information, with whom they discuss things. And it also is important in setting the stage for psychological safety in the workplace. And psychological safety in the workplace, it reflects the extent to which people feel that they can bring their ideas, bring their questions, bring their concerns, and talk to people in the workplace about this. And this impacts both employee welfare, but it also impacts the innovation, creativity, and productivity of the organization. So understanding the modality or the method of communication is important because it often has sends as much or more information than the message itself. If somebody chooses to go in person and tell somebody something versus sending out an email or a document, that also sends a message. And in uncertain times, greater clarity is really important. Being able to communicate information clearly with calm confidence and recognition of the circumstances that employees are in becomes very important. Anytime there's uncertainty, change in the environment, proactive change, the communication is very important in terms of it being effective, and the effort to support calm engagement and position leadership to be accessible, to show care and concern for employees, support during the changes to come is important. So communication, especially in uncertain times, needs to be very thoughtful and very strategic in terms of how communication takes place, making sure that the communication matches the method, and making sure that employees are able to respond to that communication, especially during uncertain times.
I think that's a great summary of some points to bring up, especially in terms of how messages can be framed.
Yes.
When it's not just for one individual, but in particular a team or a appointed group of individuals as well. So moving over to that team dynamic, I'd like to bring Dr. Bregman in on the conversation to discuss the importance of building resilience and why teams, maybe as opposed to groups, is a very important dynamic to keep in play.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to build on some of these things that we're already hearing about. I mean, communication being one of those. I mean, we know, teams are incredibly important. People have been working more and more in teams. The amount of work we do in teams has just skyrocketed over the last couple of decades. And now that we're moving to remote work, it definitely has, a different set of challenges associated with it. But it's not something that we're necessarily new to. Teamwork is just in itself, as we know, very complex. You're talking about people with tons of different personalities, experiences, attitudes, and different values, and you're trying to get them to align towards a collective goal, to collaborate to reach some sort of output. And that is just really challenging. You've got conflict, social loafing, just biased decision making. Maybe you don't have somebody speaking up who should be, and then ultimately that really impairs the team performance. It makes people pretty miserable too. The sorts of things that we want to see from a resilient team is probably not too different from in today's environment, it's probably not too different from what we really want to see in a resilient team in general. I mean, that is because the idea of a resilient team is one who's able to withstand challenges, overcome adversity. And so regardless of whether you're experiencing it or not, it's those same principles that we'll be discussing in the course, something that would apply today in a turbulent time as much as it would in a pretty, let's say normal time, right, for a matter of perspective. So something like communication has come up, this idea of psychological safety. How do you actually build an environment where people do feel safe to speak up if they disagree? It's a bit of a different challenge when you're doing that in, let's say, a remote meeting. Maybe somebody's leading the discussion. We all been part of some Zoom calls, and maybe you feel a little uncomfortable expressing an idea. That has really important ramifications, though, for your team's experiences, for your own experience as a team, for how well the team is ultimately doing. If just the person who's running the meeting is ultimately the one who is dictating where things go. So those are some of the challenges that at least I'm seeing, and some of the challenges I'm hearing. And again, the same principles that I'd be talking about in this module on what it is that builds these resilient teams would apply in today's environment, obviously, but really in any sort of environment, because teams are always facing different sorts of challenges.
And I guess in all of these challenges that we're seeing, not just now, as you mentioned, we want resilient teams in the best of times, as well as in these times of change. I guess moving to Diana, could you discuss some of the key challenges and maybe even drawn further out on what Zendaya was touching on that they're experiencing there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's been said over and over again. We're dealing with very uncertain times. So even if you've been in a leadership role for a very long time, the environment makes your job incredibly more complicated. This leadership role has now transformed to more of a navigator to help people find the right direction so that your team will be equipped to deal with these complexities. So it's important as a leader to feel comfortable in your leadership capabilities to be able to respond to these types of changes. So some best practices or areas that I think is incredibly important in order to be effective is to ensure that you have a strong, emotionally intelligent leader who is able to articulate strategy, clarify roles, align goals, and empower people to act. Incredibly important. The other component, especially in our current environment, is looking at reshaping your organizational processes, practices, and strategies that clear obstacles and create value so your employees are empowered to do the work that they're required to do. Finally, recognition, reward, and celebrations of these changes. The only way we can embrace them is in order to look at it positively. So I think most of what the other presenters have discussed ring true. It's important to inform, connect, guide, and unite in this current environment. So there's a saying that I love. It's kind of corny, but when there's crisis, there's opportunity. So I feel like currently the current climate that we have, there's plenty of opportunity for growth at a personal level that will help you drive organizational success. So programs such as the Applied Leadership Program will result in more confidence in your leadership capabilities to communicate your own vision. It'll allow you as a personal leader to take who you are, build on your strengths, and take all of that into this more complex environment, and not only turn this into complexities or issues, but really look at opportunities.
I think that reigns so true, looking for the opportunities and taking this time to build upon those, to take the negative, turn it into a positive in the face of these challenges. Easier said than done, and especially when you are in a leadership position, guiding and navigating your teams through these times. I guess to one housekeeping item that I should have mentioned before, and I apologize, is that if you as the audience members have any questions or comments, you're encouraged to put them into the group chat, and we'll take those one at a time after we do a few more questions and comments from the panel. But as we do proceed with our discussion today, please feel free to add those questions or comments into the chat. I guess in the end, or as we kind of wrap up in terms of the formal panel discussion and open up to a more group chat or group discussion, I'd turn it over to Dr. Brightman to discuss a bit more specifically how recognizing team dynamics have changed so much. I mean, even myself at the office, if I had a need, I would just run to somebody in person and ask a question or have that little discussion. But those are obviously quite limited, and we're losing out on that interpersonal dynamic, which really does build an effective team. How are you finding, or what are you hearing about how working from home has really impacted that dynamic for change on teams?
Yeah, I was exactly what I was going to touch on. From what I'm gathering, at least one of the things that we're definitely losing the most is those casual conversations. But I want to kind of explain why that matters, because there's a few different elements from those casual conversations that we really can't replicate. I mean, obviously we've got a lot of meetings, and we could talk about that. I think every company's got its own, or even every team really has its own way of handling that. You might have a lot of meetings, maybe a lot of short, brief meetings. I mean, those are things we would have been doing anyways, and I don't think that's something that's necessarily lost as much. There might be a little fatigue from that transition, but I think we're probably settling in. But like you said, it's really those informal conversations, those water cooler kind of conversations, and I think it's a big challenge, kind of in two ways. One is that from my experiences and from experiences, from most of our work experiences, that's where we get a lot of creative ideas. You might run into somebody, discuss an issue, a work issue, realize maybe there is an issue you didn't know about, maybe come up with a new way of thinking about it. Those casual conversations is what sparks innovation, and we're not, and a lot of times we're not having that. So we can talk about maybe how you can recreate that, because I think that is an opportunity that we can, to some extent, stimulate. So one of it is that lack of innovation, but I think possibly even more important, especially when it comes to teams, is that you're losing that it's very difficult to create a shared understanding of each other when you don't have those casual conversations, not work conversations about what did you do over the weekend, What are your plans coming up? When you really understand each other's life experiences, you can have a better idea of how you approach work. Maybe you have a better understanding that somebody's going through a challenge. You can have a little more sympathy and compassion when you're dealing with them. You've got a shared perspective, and that I think we're also really struggling with. The problem with that is it starts to make it really difficult for teams to develop a shared understanding, for teams to develop a shared identity. And without a shared understanding, without a shared identity, you're not going to feel safe speaking up in meetings. You're not really going to know whether your goals are necessarily aligned. You're going to have doubts about whether everybody's working as well. Trust starts to get eroded. So there's a lot of challenges with that. But like I've alluded to, there are ways I think that we can do a really good job of trying to recreate some of these moments. It's creating norms. I know for some, there's been this idea of, when you start a meeting, maybe talk about, kind of like an icebreaker, but I kind of want to push past that idea of what's your favorite hobby kind of idea beyond the icebreakers to really focus more on this sharedness, on actually, let's create some meetings, for example, that are not about work. I know we're all extraordinarily busy right now, but if we need that shared identity, it's really important to have a half an hour meeting of, let's not discuss work, let's just catch up as a team. What's going on in your lives? What do you do? Anything fun, anything interesting you're planning on doing? Recreates that environment of a shared understanding. And that is really important to foster trust. I know with my own colleagues, I try to actually have a few minutes at the beginning, even though we are so busy, to say, what is going on? Let's get back to actually know each other and not just jump right into business, which is really difficult. Another thing to focus on when it comes to some of these discussions is realigning a little bit on that collective goals, on that collective roles. We've talked about communication here. It has to be really consistent. So another way to create that shared identity, which gets lost without those water cooler conversations, is actually focusing on the meetings, realigning what are our goals, what are the roles that everybody's playing, to make sure everyone feels very indispensable, but also knowing that we're all shooting towards the exact same end goal. And that's something that is really easy to get lost when you're not all together, is making sure everyone is aligned very clearly on what it is that we're trying to do as a collective, and then what role each individual team member is playing. Another thing that's really, really important as we're moving to this online remote workforce.
It is an adjustment, there's no doubt. I know in our group, we're a small team, but keeping that motivation up and keeping that connectedness up, team chats have helped. I've heard of other groups doing virtual coffee hours or coffee breaks. With another team I work with, we've had a virtual happy hour, so those types of things. And I know even on our smaller team here at the university, we do daily trivia, which can be nice to bring people together, creates that vibe. So those types of initiatives are important for keeping people together, building those teams. I think we also wanted to touch upon a bit of how to do these tasks. So keeping the team together as an effective one is great, but the work still has to be done. So speaking a bit to the project management element of overlooking teams and leading them during these times of change, would either perhaps Dr. Qantas or Diana want to speak a bit to how the difference between just surviving and thriving, and the project management tools that leaders can implement to help get through these times in terms of managing these day-to-day tasks?
I'll go ahead. I think that the virtual environment, as Kyle was just talking about, is hugely challenging in terms of managing and coordinating both. And this goes to the heart of a thriving team versus a surviving team. It goes to the heart of communications. But I think one of the challenges is, as a team leader, how do you communicate? How do you bring people together? There needs to be a balance between not having people on Zoom all the time. I don't know about others, but I have heard Zoom fatigue over and over from people that I work with. And yet that togetherness is really important. So some of the project management tools, I think, are making sure that everything is documented in ways that maybe if you could just stop by somebody's cubicle and say, hey, what's going on? How is this? If the whole flow and the whole management strategy is documented in a way that everybody has access to the same document, that might eliminate that need, but still creating spaces where people can ask questions and can bring to the table, well, what do I do now? What, how is this working out? And it's a fine balance in this virtual world, and bringing people together on screen rather than being able to have those informal little impromptu conversations that Kyle was talking about.
I agree. Diana, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Catherine brings up a great point in terms of that clarity. I think I'm coming in from an HR component where we're looking at those expectations. The work still needs to get done. So the more you're able to communicate and document to ensure that employees still recognize these expectations still exist, the work still has to get done, will really help leaders be more effective and getting the results that are required.
So with that, do you have any specific tools? I know Zendaya was speaking specifically from the perspective of what's happening at Highline and tech, and not having the tech savviness required to maybe carry out some of these jobs. Are there any other, do any of you have any favorite apps or favorite tools or tech tools that help you guys manage your teams and carry on those day-to-day tasks that still need to be done?
Yeah, I think any type of sharing document, like there's SharePoint. I know a lot of internal organizations have like a Citrix component where there are these live documents that employees and managers can share, so that basically those expectations are tracked and information is easily flown. I think any app or avenue electronically would be really effective, and something that I highly recommend any leader would implement.
I think that's great. Let's talk about something that's even a bit more of a challenge. So we've talked about how to help teams and the tools you can do to bring them up to speed. But what about those people in your teams that are just not having it? They're way too, not way too, but very resistant and a bit cautious about heading into these unknown territories, especially given the current climate, but maybe even just in the best of times when team members are resistant to change.
That's a big challenge. And as a leader, the challenge for leaders, I think, in overcoming that resistance is twofold. One is to make sure that employees who are resistant to change understand why the change has to be. Clearly, moving to the virtual world, that's obvious. We can't go into our offices as we used to. But there are also a lot of changes in organizations that need to happen for a variety of reasons that people may be resistant to. We're all comfortable in how we do things. Just listening to this call and some of the things that we've been talking about, moving virtually has been a challenge for many of us, but we know why we had to do it. So the first bit of overcoming resistance is really making clear to employees and people on the team the importance of why this change has to happen. The second piece of it is to make clear how it's going to happen and to support that. So the learning, the making sure that, for example, how to use new technology, how to use different technology, the applications of that technology, and providing safe spaces to be able to play with it and to learn it and make mistakes in non-consequential situations, so that confidence gets put in place for team members to be able to know how this works, why it works, and that the organization has supported it. And both Kyle and I brought up the psychological safety, which I think is absolutely huge in times of change. Employees dealing with change need to know they're supported. So part of the resistance, overcoming resistance to change, is giving people the space to make mistakes in a way that is not detrimental to them, where they won't be laughed at, they won't be looked at odd, and it won't be held against them if they make mistakes in this safe place. Then they can carry that confidence forward into more consequential situations.
Confidence and feeling safe, that's definitely been a common theme throughout our discussion today. In terms of other group questions or anybody in the chat, just a reminder that if anybody listening today would like to add a comment or ask a question, please just include it in the chat and we'll address it. We've had Erica Greenham come in. Hi, Erica. To list a few of the apps and tools that she finds helpful in project management. And so To Do, Smartsheet, and Planner, I've used To Do myself, but great project management tools for team guidance, and especially in this virtual world. So thanks, Erica. Move on to the theme of, again, managing yourself as you're also managing and leading teams. I guess this goes to Dr. Brightman. What can leaders do to kind of manage their own anxiety in these uncertain times?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, that's, definitely have ramifications for your own team in terms of how you're managing yourself. And I mean, maybe not particular to the session itself, but I think, and Catherine could probably speak to it better from that psychological perspective, but it's certainly understanding that we all have these challenges right now. I think there might be a tendency in our culture to try to push past, whereas and maybe especially as a leader, to think that you need to put on that brave face. I think more than that is people want to see a very authentic leader. They want to see somebody who is kind of like themselves, experiencing these challenges just the same. So I know we've talked about the communication aspect today, but I think a confusion comes from, well, what am I supposed to be communicating? I think it's often just, the goals, the tasks, but it's also kind of what's going on, that authenticity, that honesty, that people need, that our teams need just as much as we need from ourselves. So it starts with being pretty forthright with yourself and trying to have that sense of, well, what's exactly going on for me, and then also being very honest and very authentic with your team. Otherwise, these sorts of emotions, the challenges that we're experiencing today, are eventually going to consume us as leaders and then degrade our teamwork also.
And if I may build on that, I totally agree with that. And I think that leaders have to be a little bit gentle with themselves and also realize that they're modeling behavior. What they do is going to be modeled by their subordinates and by their team members. So if you have a leader who tries to just push ahead, pretend like nothing's happened, and put on that brave face only, that's likely what everyone else in the team is going to assume they must do. And that's a block to being able to effectively work together and transition through uncertain and turbulent times. So I think the authenticity and the ability to model how one can get through this, recognize what the challenges are, and still move ahead, I think that's huge, and goes to the authenticity that you were talking about, Kyle.
Yeah, I'm so glad that that's how you put it, because that's exactly what I was thinking, exactly what I was trying to convey. That, yeah, I mean, we maybe forget that people do look to us as leaders to inform how they're supposed to behave, and when you do make it safe to be a little vulnerable, safe to say, yeah, things are a little challenging for me right now, you set that signal to the rest of the team that they can also, they can freely share that as well. And so it is so important to be modeling that type of behavior. So thanks for building on that.
So taking it one step further now and kind of going down the inevitable path that as a leader and leading and guiding teams, we're going to experience some degree of failure at some point. So maybe I can put it to the panel to discuss, one, how do you deal with that in the immediate future while it's happened, and then down the road to kind of rebound and pick the team back up, bring yourselves together and learn from that.
I can jump in first and let everybody else fill in. I mean, it actually speaks to one of the pillars of team resilience that I will be talking about in this session, on reflection. I think that's actually one of the areas that has become probably most difficult. We were talking about shared understanding, psychological safety, the communication. I think we know that a little bit. Maybe it's difficult to practice, certainly, but one that I think is really important for overcoming some of these failures is this thoughtful reflection. So we talked about some of these meetings. Some of these communication, it also should be revolving a little bit more around, what has been working for us so far, what isn't, how do we adapt? So it's a little bit of reflection with some improvisation kind of built into it. I think that's something that we struggle with in any environment. It's probably one of the harder things for teams to do, because it's probably a little uncomfortable. I think we're used to just get the work done, move forward, get the work done, move forward. But especially with such a rapidly changing environment, it is so important, and it's on leaders to kind of initiate these conversations. After a project is successful or not, in both cases, why? What can we do differently? We're doing things that are very novel, and when you do things that are new, you're going to come with more mistakes. And so it is important to say, even just over the last couple months, as we're transitioning to this remote work, what people like, what don't people like, what is working, what isn't working. Very simple conversations, but they can start to elicit a lot of novel ideas for us to be able to actually improve upon. So I think whether it's a failure or a success, that reflection component is really critical for a team to be resilient. And so something that I think in terms of some of the low-hanging fruit that I'm not seeing as much, I think that's probably an area that I would recommend leaders to try to actively be pushing towards, is the communication focused on a reflection, both positive and negative, that have occurred.
And if I could build on that, Kyle, you're talking about team failure. And Megan, I think the question, when you posed it, I was thinking also, what about leadership failure? And I think if you feel as a leader that there has been a failure in leadership, it's a fine line to determine where that reflection needs to be internal only versus shared with the team. Especially in challenging times, you don't want to be in a situation where you have a leader sharing all kinds of angst or inappropriate reflection with a team, but to really thoughtfully think through what is important to share. If a leader has a failure, the team will see the failure. So what is the best way to strategically bring the team on board to problem solve, and what kinds of things are best left for the leader to deal with by themselves in terms of retooling and learning and moving ahead? And that's kind of a situation by situation, person by person thing, but that's when having somebody else in the organization external to the team to be able to talk to somebody else is very helpful. So having that network, I think, is very important for effective leadership, especially in uncertain times.
And if I could just add one quick thing to what Catherine had indicated, I think it's also important, and Kyle and Catherine both talked about this notion of psychological safe places in the workplace, but allowing your team to provide that feedback. So as a leader, if you failed at something, it may be disheartening to hear from your team their feedback from that, but that information is incredibly valuable. So allowing your team to feel comfortable to bring forward and say, hey, you had told us to do this and it completely went off field. They need to be comfortable with their leader to provide that information as well.
It's a great point. It kind of brings us back to where we started in terms of communication and how to relay those messages, what to keep to ourselves and what to bring forward in times of change, but failure and success. So this has been great. I'm going to open it up for any other questions from the group before I move over to the panel for some wrap-up comments. And in the meantime, I'm wondering, well, perhaps people in our audience would like to pose a question. I'm going to throw it to Diana and ask her if she could just wrap up a bit the discussion today in terms of how it relates to the course itself, the Applied Leadership Program. Discuss a bit more about the applied component and how our partners at Highline Mushroom will be contributing to a final project and kind of the culminating, tying everything up for the class.
Absolutely. So I think it's incredibly important that our participants are here today, because it's the first part of being mindful that you want to have the tools to enhance your leadership practice. So I think the fact that you're in this session today is excellent and is step one. To tie it up in the Applied Leadership Program, we will be providing a number of different practical tools. So we've partnered up with Highline Mushrooms to present some pretty complex challenges that not only will you be learning from our instructors, the practices, but you'll actually apply it to a real world situation and some very complex issues from a leadership component. There's lots of HR issues, lots of areas that we'll be looking at. So not only will you have the tools, but you'll be able to apply them to a real world situation. Additionally, though, you'll walk away with a number of different tools that will allow you to look at your own leadership practice and be more effective based upon the curriculum that we've developed. And we really find it high value, and you definitely will appreciate it.
Thanks, Diana. And just to touch on that a bit more, I'm just going through that information to touch on the point that participants in the program will also receive feedback, am I correct, on their individual leadership plans? Yep. That they will be able to take with them back to their own workplace, correct?
Yep, absolutely. So not only will you be presented this information, but you'll have an opportunity to develop resources for your own self and get feedback from each of the instructors for your own personal situations. We recognize each industry and each leader are going to have their own challenges. So we really want to ensure that you have that personalized takeaway that will be valuable specifically to you.
That's great. And in terms of some of the logistics for making that transition from the virtual classroom learning to your workplace and making it more really an applied experience. So the goal of this program, or one of the goals of this program, was to make it practical and hands-on so that it's not just theoretical knowledge, it's being applied to real world circumstance, and that you'll be able to take it back to your workplace and implement the skills you will come out with in terms of what we talked today, communication, project management, and just to build yourself up and your confidence as a current leader or an aspiring leader. Talking a bit more about the logistics of that and bringing it back to your workplace. If anybody is interested in having their employer sponsor them to participate in the Applied Leadership Program, there are some government funding programs available, and we're happy to help you with that, and we can help you with the application process, do the work for you. The Canada Ontario Job Grant, and I'll send that out with a copy of this recording for further information, so that perhaps if that might be an option to you and your employer, we can look at that and work with you to have that come into play. We'd also like to remind everybody that if you are an alumni of the University of Windsor, you are eligible for a 10% discount on the enrollment fee. And we're happy to offer that through all of our continuing education offerings to our UWindsor alumni. So now that I've done my plug and really hit the nail on the head, as they say, for promotion of the ALP, I'm going to turn it back to the panel for closing comments. We'll start with Dr. Qantas, if you'd like to begin, followed by Dr. Breichman, and we'll leave it to Diana to sew us up today. Again, at any point, if you do have any questions or comments, though, please don't be shy. Add them into the chat. Over to you, Dr. Qantas. Thank you.
Thank you. I think this program is a very exciting one. I think the applied aspect of it is particularly interesting. As Diana said, the modules that I'll be working with, as with all of the modules, are ones that are really geared towards, working in a group setting as a class, still geared towards each person coming up with what makes sense for them, what works best for their own individual circumstances. Certainly the communication module will be looking at a lot of different strategies, how to use them effectively, when to use different strategies. And the managing change will be looking also at how do you analyze and proactively lead change in the workplace. And I look forward to working with anybody who signs up. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Dr. Breichman?
Yeah, I mean, likewise, also really excited, like I said, to lead the module on the science of effective teams. Like I've discussed already, the real focus of it, because I could spend 12 sessions on effective teams, but what we tried to distill here was focusing on team resilience and that conflict management. It just happens to be very topical. It's where my passion lies, and a lot of the topics we've talked about already today is what we're going to end up delving into. So psychological safety, the reflection, shared understanding, a few other principles, but like it's already been repeated, trying to make it very applied. So we will have a couple exercises, some simulations, a conflict management piece also, to understand a little bit more about your own personal approaches to managing conflict, which is usually one of the top challenges that teams mostly face in terms of these major adversities. So hopefully another area that we can learn how to better get along with our team members, ultimately build teams that are able to withstand unexpected challenges.
Thank you, Dr. Beckman. Diana, any closing comments?
Sure. So I think everyone on the panel really did a great job of talking about how this program will really marry practical with theory. So what's presented, especially in the modules that I'll be presenting upon, it'll give you the best practices and the theory behind what we're talking about, but it'll also give you an opportunity to look at that and think about how you can apply it directly to your own role immediately, to your own workplace immediately. Additionally, I think, a leadership development, personal development is going to be a lifelong process. And a lot of what all of the instructors will present to you will be a start of a wonderful journey. So you'll walk away with tools that will allow you to continuously develop as a leader in your own leadership success, in your own personal success. And I, like everybody else, I'm looking forward to those who sign up.
Wonderful. Well, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today, and special thanks to our project sponsors at Highline Mushrooms. Sandai, did you have any closing comments you'd like to add based on what was said today?
Just hearing everyone's comments, I think it was a great discussion. It also helped me understand the program a bit more. With all the details, I think it will be very effective for upcoming leaders specifically.
Wonderful. Well, we thank you again for joining with us at the University of Windsor Continuing Education in bringing this program to life and making it as meaningful and practical as we anticipate it will be. So with all that said, I thank you, our audience, for joining us today. Again, apologies sincerely for the technical issues at the beginning there, but I think overall we had a great discussion, a great turnout, and I look forward to receiving any other questions that you may have in the middle of the night that come to you, or if you'd like to learn more about the program, it's at continue.umer.ca. I'll make a copy of this recording available on the website as well, and I'll follow up with email. So thanks again for your time today, and we look forward to hopefully seeing you in the virtual class in October. Take care.